The cake was lemon with buttercream roses, and someone had tied pale yellow ribbons to every chair in Claudette's sunroom. 31 women sat around me in a loose horseshoe, their voices layered over each other like the sound of a radio left on in another room. I was 8 months pregnant, wearing a dress the color of cream, and I remember thinking, right in the middle of unwrapping a set of monogrammed onesies, that I had never felt more visible in my entire life. Not seen. Visible. There is a difference. Claudette stood near the doorway between the sunroom and the kitchen, holding a glass of white wine and watching. She had organized everything: the venue, the guest list, the catering, the floral arrangements. She had also, without asking, addressed the invitations herself, which meant certain people from my own life hadn't received one. My colleague Dana. My neighbor Ruth. 2 women from my prenatal yoga class who had become genuinely kind presences in my 3rd trimester. When I noticed their absence halfway through the afternoon, I felt the first small pull of something I couldn't name. I set it aside. I had gotten good at that. She just wanted it to be intimate, Simone had said the week before, when I mentioned the guest list felt off. Simone was seated to my left now, laughing at something the woman across from her had said. She looked completely at ease in Claudette's house. She always did. Simone and I had been friends since our 2nd year of college, 9 years, long enough that I had stopped questioning her instincts. She had a talent for reframing things in ways that made me feel steadied. Looking back, I understand that isn't always the same as being honest. The afternoon moved the way those events do with gifts, games, food, photographs. Claudette circulated the room with the confidence of someone who had planned this moment carefully and knew exactly how it would unfold. She was charming with everyone, refilling glasses, touching arms, saying names. With me, she was warm in the way that certain surfaces are warm, not from the inside, but because they've absorbed heat from somewhere else. Near the end, she came and sat beside me. The room had thinned. A few guests were gathering their things near the door. Claudette reached over and straightened the bow on the gift still in my lap, though it didn't need straightening. "Enjoy this," she said. She wasn't looking at the gift. She was looking at me. Her expression was pleasant, composed, almost maternal, but her eyes held something still and deliberate. Like a sentence that had been prepared in advance. "I will," I said. "Thank you for all of this." She smiled and stood and moved back toward the kitchen. I have replayed that moment many times. The 2 words. The timing. The way she touched the bow. Even then, something in my body registered it as a warning I didn't have language for. My chest tightened almost imperceptibly. I told myself it was the pregnancy, late-stage fatigue, heightened emotion, the ordinary static of a body doing enormous work. The envelope arrived the next morning. It was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came downstairs, propped against the fruit bowl. Derek was already at work. The envelope was cream-colored, the same shade as my shower dress, and my name was written on the front in Claudette's handwriting, neat, deliberate, slightly formal. No stamp. She had delivered it herself. Inside was a single folded page. A letter, handwritten. I read it standing at the counter in my socks, one hand resting on my stomach. The letter was 6 paragraphs long. It was polite in tone and devastating in content. It outlined, in careful and specific language, Claudette's concerns about my suitability as a mother. My temperament. My career. My background. It referenced my own mother's difficulties, things I had shared with Derek in private, and reframed them as inherited liabilities. It suggested, gently and with apparent warmth, that I consider whether I was truly prepared for what was coming. And it closed with the line, "I say this because I love this family, and that now includes you." I stood there for a long time. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beneath the silverware tray. I didn't call Derek. I didn't call Simone. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a bird work at the feeder in the yard, and I understood, in the particular, airless way you understand something you have been avoiding for a long time, that the shower had not been a gift. It had been a performance. And the letter was the real message. Derek and I had met at 26, through mutual friends at a birthday dinner in a crowded restaurant downtown. He was easy to like, steady, attentive, quick to laugh. He had a quality I found genuinely rare then: he listened without waiting to speak. On our third date he told me about his father leaving when he was 11, and the way he described it, without self-pity, without performance, made me trust him immediately. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. I was teaching second-grade art at Millbrook Elementary by then, a job that wore me out and filled me up in equal measure. Derek managed logistics for a mid-sized construction firm. We had a routine that felt like something we'd built together deliberately: Sunday farmers markets, Tuesday dinners with friends, Friday evenings at home with a film and whatever I'd cooked. It wasn't dramatic. It was good. Claudette entered my life 8 months into the relationship, when Derek first brought me to a Sunday lunch at her house in the north part of the city. She lived in a large, well-maintained colonial with cream-colored walls and coordinated everything: cushions, throws, candles, the plates on the kitchen shelves. The house looked like a very careful idea of what a home should look like. She welcomed me warmly that day, asked about my family, my work, my plans. I came home thinking she was lovely. The shift was so gradual I have trouble locating it precisely. It wasn't a single moment but an accumulation, a slow rearrangement of small things that individually meant nothing but together added up to a pattern I refused to name. A comment about my cooking at a family dinner: "Oh, you used garlic?" Derek's never really liked garlic. Derek, sitting beside me, said nothing. He had, in fact, always eaten my garlic chicken without complaint. I remember glancing at him and waiting for the small correction that didn't come. A question about our finances asked directly to Derek at a holiday gathering, in a room full of people, as though I weren't present. When I answered instead, Claudette smiled and redirected the conversation. A habit, developed over the first year, of calling Derek's cell rather than our home number, always his cell, always when she wanted something arranged or decided, so that by the time I heard about any plan, it had already been made. I brought it up with Derek twice in that first year. The first time, he was understanding. He said he'd talked to her. The second time, he was tired. He said I was being sensitive, that she meant well, that she was his mother and this was just how she communicated. His tone wasn't unkind. It was the tone of someone who had made peace with something and needed me to do the same. I told myself he was right. It was a reasonable thing to tell myself. It required almost no effort because I was already in the habit of finding reasons to believe it. Simone reinforced it consistently. Over coffee, over wine, in the quick back and forth of text messages late at night when I was overthinking something Claudette had said: "She's protective. She's not malicious. You're probably reading into it." Simone had lost her own mother at 19. She had complicated feelings about mothers in general, and I thought that was coloring her interpretation. I trusted her anyway. The pregnancy changed the texture of everything. When we told Claudette, she cried, genuinely, it seemed. She reached across the table and gripped my hands in hers, and for a moment something in me softened. I thought, maybe I have been unfair. Maybe this is the thing that shifts it. Pregnancy has a way of making you believe in the possibility of fresh starts. But the involvement that followed was not the involvement of a woman sharing in a joy. It was the involvement of someone claiming territory. She researched pediatricians without being asked and forwarded the results with a note that said I already called, they have availability. She asked Derek, not me, whether we had decided on a name. She offered to redecorate the nursery and, when I said we had already started, expressed concern that the paint color I'd chosen was too stimulating for newborns. She was never rude. That was the most disorienting part. She was never loud or overtly hostile. Every comment arrived wrapped in warmth, in apparent goodwill. It made me doubt my own readings of each exchange. It made me feel that naming what was happening would make me the problem. I didn't name it. I absorbed it. I rearranged myself around it in ways I didn't fully track until much later. Iris arrived 6 days early, on a gray Tuesday morning in February, after a labor that lasted 14 hours. Derek was present and steady throughout. He held my hand, spoke quietly, did everything you'd want someone to do. In that room, with monitors beeping and the particular fluorescent clarity of a hospital at 4 a.m., I felt close to him in a way that temporarily dissolved everything else. Claudette arrived at the hospital 2 hours after the birth. She had not been called. Derek had texted his brother, who must have told her. She walked into the recovery room carrying flowers and wearing an expression of radiant ownership that I was too exhausted to process. She held Iris for 40 minutes. I held her for 8 before a nurse gently suggested I rest. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life in ways no one had prepared me for. Sleep deprivation at a level that felt neurological. Hormonal crashes that left me crying without cause. The particular disorientation of a body that had done something enormous and was now expected to simply continue. Derek went back to work after 2 weeks. Claudette began coming by most mornings. She said she wanted to help. She folded laundry and made tea and held Iris while I showered. These were useful things. But she also rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, twice. She commented on my breastfeeding posture in front of a visiting friend. She told me, gently, that I seemed overwhelmed, said it in the specific tone of someone filing an observation for later use. I began to feel watched. Not cared for. Watched. I mentioned it to Derek one evening after Claudette had left. He was at the counter opening his laptop, and I stood in the kitchen doorway with Iris on my shoulder and said, carefully, that I felt like his mother's visits were starting to feel less like support and more like supervision. He closed the laptop. He turned around. His expression was not unkind, it was tired and familiar, and carried the specific quality of a man who has heard this before and has already decided what it means. She's trying, he said. She doesn't always get it right. But she's trying. I know she's trying, I said. I'm asking whether we can talk about what it feels like. He said he didn't want to fight about his mother when we had a newborn. He said this with such reasonableness that I felt the floor shift slightly, the way it does when you're certain you're standing on solid ground and something beneath you moves. I didn't push it. I went back to Iris and the night feeding and the slow, gray hours of 2 a.m. That was the first time I truly started to doubt, not Claudette, not Derek, but the version of reality I'd been maintaining. I had told myself for 3 years that the discomfort I felt around her was my own sensitivity. That Derek's habit of smoothing things over was reasonableness. That Simone's reframings were friendship. I had built a very functional story, and I had lived inside it carefully, and the cost of doing so had been a kind of constant low-grade self-erasure I had not permitted myself to measure. I still had the letter. It was still in the drawer beneath the silverware tray. I had not shown it to Derek. I had not been able to fully explain to myself why, except that showing it would require a conversation I didn't know how to have without sounding like someone making an accusation. I had been trained, very gradually and without drama, to distrust my own perceptions. And letters require certainty. Around this time I noticed Simone pulling back slightly. Shorter responses to my messages. A cancelled visit she rescheduled once, then let drop. When I mentioned it, she said she was overwhelmed with work, and I believed her because it was easier than the alternative. I didn't ask the question I should have asked: why does she seem more comfortable avoiding me than being present with me right now? I filed it away instead, in the place where I kept the things I wasn't ready to look at. Iris was 4 months old when I found the second letter. Derek had left his jacket on the bedroom chair, the charcoal one he wore to his mother's Sunday lunches, and when I picked it up to hang it I felt something in the inside breast pocket. A folded piece of paper. I hesitated. Then I opened it. It was a letter from Claudette to Derek. Dated 3 weeks earlier. Handwritten, same cream paper, same deliberate script. I read it quickly, then again slowly, then a third time standing very still. The letter was not about me directly. It was about the marriage. It expressed concern, again warmly, with apparent love, that Derek was losing himself. That the person he had become since marrying me was quieter, less certain, more withdrawn. It referred to me, without naming me directly, as that particular dynamic. It suggested, without stating it outright, that Derek owed it to himself, and to Iris, to evaluate whether the life he was living was truly the one he had chosen. And in the second-to-last paragraph, a line that I read 4 times before I could absorb it, Simone agrees with me. She sees it too. She's worried about you, not about your wife's feelings. I sat down on the edge of the bed with the letter in my hands. Simone, who had been my friend for 9 years. Who had reframed every concern I'd raised into evidence of my own oversensitivity. Who had cancelled visits, pulled back, grown distant in the months since Iris arrived. Who had told me, over and over, that Claudette meant well. Not because she believed it. Because she had been in conversation with Claudette all along. Looking back, the signs had been there for longer than I wanted to admit. Simone had met Claudette at our engagement party and taken to her immediately. I had thought it was simply their personalities, both of them warm and social and at ease in rooms full of people. There had been a lunch, 2 years in, that Simone mentioned casually. I ran into Derek's mom, we grabbed coffee, which I had filed away as coincidence. A comment Claudette had made once about Simone being such a grounded person, said with a particular emphasis I hadn't examined. I hadn't examined any of it. I had wanted my friend to be my friend. That wanting had been enough to prevent me from asking questions. I put the letter back in Derek's jacket pocket. I hung the jacket on the door hook. I went downstairs and made tea and fed Iris and sat very quietly with what I now knew. The thing about discovering a betrayal of this kind, not a single event but a long, patient architecture of it, is that it doesn't feel like an explosion. It feels like the moment you finally see the whole picture after staring at parts of it for years. The grief is large, but it is not surprising. Some part of you already knew. You had just been doing the work of not knowing, which is its own kind of exhausting. I began, slowly and without announcing it, to pay attention differently. I kept both letters. I started writing things down, dates, comments, interactions, in a notes app on my phone. I stopped sharing things with Simone. I watched Derek's phone without touching it. I watched Claudette at the next Sunday lunch and noticed, now that I was looking clearly, how she directed conversation, how she positioned herself between me and Derek in every exchange, how she addressed him with a specificity of attention that left no room for me. I was not looking for more evidence. I had enough. I was looking, I think, for the courage to use it. I chose a Sunday. Iris was asleep upstairs. Derek was at the kitchen table with his laptop, doing something administrative that could wait. I put both letters on the table in front of him. Mine from the drawer. His from where I had replaced it and retrieved again, the day before. He looked at them. Then at me. His face did the thing it does when he is deciding how to respond, a brief stillness, almost imperceptible, before the expression settles. "Where did you get that one?" he said, about his letter. "Your jacket pocket," I said. 3 days ago. "Nora. I need you to read them both," I said. "And then I need you to sit with what it means that I've been living with one of those for 7 months and didn't feel safe enough to show you." He read them. He took longer with his than with mine. When he finished, he set them both flat on the table and looked at them for a moment before he looked up. What followed was not a fight. It was something worse, a conversation so honest it stripped the room of any remaining pretense. Derek did not deny the letters. He did not defend his mother with the usual smoothing over. Something in him seemed to break open, or perhaps had already been broken and was now simply visible. He said he'd known his mother had been in contact with Simone. He said he hadn't known about my letter until now, and I believed him. His reaction when he read it had been genuine, the first unmanaged expression I had seen from him in months. He said, "I think I've been making it easy for her because it was easier than stopping her." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in a year. It arrived too late to save anything, but it mattered. Honesty offered too late still has a kind of value. It tells you the person is capable of it, which is both a comfort and a sorrow. I told him that I could not continue in a marriage that had become a managed performance. That I had spent years adjusting myself to fit a space that someone else kept quietly reshaping. That I had watched my own instincts be reframed as sensitivity until I'd stopped trusting them. And that a woman who had smiled at me at my own baby shower and already had that letter ready to deliver, that was not someone I could build a family in the presence of. He didn't argue. He sat with it. He asked if there was anything that could change what I was thinking. I told him the truth, I didn't know yet. But I needed him to understand that the question wasn't just about his mother. It was about whether he could become someone who would choose me first, in small moments, consistently, over time. Not in a crisis. Not in a letter. In the daily friction of an ordinary life. He said he understood. Whether he was capable of it was a different question. I called Simone that evening. She answered on the second ring with her usual warmth, "Hey, how are things?" And I told her I had found the letter. There was a silence on her end that lasted almost 5 seconds and told me everything about the shape of her guilt. She started to explain. She'd been worried about Derek, she had wanted to help, Claudette had reached out to her first, she'd thought she was doing the right thing. "You were my person," I said. That was the only thing that mattered. I didn't hang up dramatically. I just said I needed some time and I would be in touch. I set the phone down on the counter and stood in the kitchen where the evening light was coming through the window at a low angle, falling across the floor in long rectangles, and I felt something shift inside me that wasn't grief. It was closer to recognition. The recognition of someone who has finally put down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing the effort. Derek and I separated 4 months later. It was not sudden and it was not hostile. It was the slow, careful unwinding of a thing that had been constructed on foundations neither of us had examined closely enough. He did try, I want to say that because it's true. He set a clear boundary with Claudette in the weeks after our conversation, and she responded exactly as I had expected, with wounded withdrawal, then with reapproach through Derek's brother, then with a letter to both of us that was, again, warm in tone and designed to re-establish her position as the injured party. Derek showed me the letter without my asking. That mattered. But the gap that had opened, not between me and him, but between me and the version of myself I'd allowed to shrink inside our marriage, was not something a changed behavior could close. I had spent 3 years fitting myself into a space that kept being quietly made smaller. The work of rebuilding myself was mine to do, and I was not able to do it while still living inside the original conditions. We agreed on joint custody of Iris. The arrangement was civil, and the care Derek took in those negotiations told me that whatever failures had accumulated between us, his love for her was real and uncomplicated. That was the thing that made everything else bearable. I moved into a small rented house 2 miles away in the spring. It had a back garden and a clawfoot tub and a kitchen with yellow walls that the previous tenant had painted, and I left them yellow because I liked them. I set up a studio space in the second bedroom, canvases, oil sticks, the smell of turpentine that I had missed without knowing it. I had stopped painting when Iris was born. I started again. I didn't hear from Simone for 5 months. Then she sent a long message, thoughtful, genuinely remorseful, asking if I would be willing to meet. I sat with it for 2 weeks before I replied. I told her I needed more time. That was honest. I still don't know what that friendship becomes, if it becomes anything. Some things need a longer perspective than I currently have. Claudette sent a card when Iris turned 1. I did not respond to it. That felt like enough. What I know now, that I didn't know at 31, is that manipulation rarely announces itself. It arrives as care, as concern, as the helpfulness of someone who simply loves you and wants to be involved. It positions itself so completely inside the language of love that naming it feels like ingratitude. And that is by design, not necessarily conscious design, but effective design. Systems of control are most durable when the person inside them can't identify the structure. I had told myself, for years, that I was being sensitive. That word, sensitive, had been used around me so consistently, and I had absorbed it so thoroughly, that I had turned it into a self-accusation. Something to manage. Something to apologize for. Iris has her father's jaw in my eyes and a laugh that takes up the whole room. On the Saturdays she is with me, I wake early and lie in the quiet of the yellow kitchen and listen for her, and the quality of that particular silence, alert, full, belonging entirely to me, is something I could not have described before I had it. Enjoy this, Claudette had said, at the shower. I do. More than she intended. What this story ultimately traces is not a single betrayal but the architecture of one, the way control can be built slowly, without noise, inside the structure of family and friendship, until the person at the center of it can no longer tell the difference between what she chose and what she was gradually cornered into. Claudette's method was never confrontation. It was positioning. She operated at the level of the frame rather than the picture, never directly telling Nora what to think or feel, but consistently determining the terms by which Nora's thoughts and feelings would be evaluated. The guest list at the shower. The kitchen reorganization. The comments delivered with warmth. Each individually dismissible. Cumulatively, an architecture. What makes this particular dynamic so psychologically effective is that it exploits the exact qualities that make someone a good partner and parent. Nora's willingness to extend good faith, to reframe her discomfort as sensitivity, to prioritize the peace of those she loved over her own perceptions, these are not weaknesses. They are the behaviors of someone who genuinely values relationships. The system Claudette constructed was calibrated precisely to those values. The more Nora cared about the family's well-being, the more easily her concerns could be absorbed and neutralized. Simone's role is perhaps the most psychologically damaging element, not because her betrayal was dramatic, but because it was invisible for so long. A friend who reframes every concern as overreaction is not offering perspective. She is supplying the key piece of any manipulation system, the internal validator who makes the target do the doubting herself. Nora never needed Claudette to tell her she was wrong. She had Simone for that. By the time the alliance was revealed, Nora's capacity for trusting her own instincts had been quietly and systematically undermined from two directions at once. Derek's failure is quieter than either of theirs but in some ways more consequential, because it occupied the space where protection should have been. He was not cruel. He was conflict avoidant in the specific way that becomes complicity, choosing the path of least resistance in each individual moment without reckoning with the cumulative direction of all those choices. A man who says she means well and you're being sensitive enough times is not keeping the peace. He is choosing whose reality to validate. What Nora's story illustrates about trust is this: trust is not a single decision made at the beginning of a relationship. It is rebuilt or eroded in the smallest repeated moments, in who is believed when accounts differ, in whose discomfort is named and whose is smoothed over, in what questions go unasked because asking would cost too much. The absence of a single dramatic lie does not mean nothing was taken. What stays with me about this story isn't the letter, though that image, the cream envelope propped against the fruit bowl, is hard to forget. It's the shower. The smile. The two words said with that particular stillness. Enjoy this. Because I think most people in Nora's position would have done exactly what she did, received it as warmth, filed away the discomfort, moved on. We are trained, most of us, to give the benefit of the doubt to people who are performing care. What does it cost us, over years, to keep doing that? How much of ourselves do we hand over to the interpretation that we are the problem, simply because that interpretation is the one that keeps the peace? Nora got her answer eventually. The question is how long it takes the rest of us to start asking.